Well, welcome back. Still continuing our discussions here on racism in all forms of sporting activities. We are here, we're in Ekurhuleni at Emperor's Palace, that's where we're broadcasting, and this is where so many people are coming. It's absolutely quite amazing to see the amount of international media presence that is here, and that, I think, just gives us an indication as to how seriously the world is taking discrimination and racism in sports. It's rife in every sporting activity, and something needs to be done dramatically. Well, joining us now, I introduced you to my next guest just before we took a break, and it's a great pleasure, really, to be joined by William Gaillard, who is from the Union of European Football Association. So nice to have you, and welcome to Morning Live and to South Africa.
Pleasure.
And also with us is Ambassador Abdul Minty, who is also going to be talking to us about racism in sports. So good to have you, and thank you for being our guest. All right, let's start off again. It seems that we always come back to football because I suppose with so many representatives from football, and in a way, could one assume that there is so much racism in football that there are more organizations than I've ever seen for any other sporting code to try and get rid of this racism?
Well, I think it's not because there's more racism in football than in anything else. I mean, in many ways, because football is so popular, it mirrors society. It's the overwhelming popularity of football that has made it also attractive, even for organized extremist groups to try to use football to propagate their hateful ideas. So in some ways, football is also the victim of its popularity.
I mean, we've had incidences on football fields where matches have had to stop due to some activities on the field that are considered racist.
Well, again, yeah, it is, and it's a reflection of society. We have areas, in particular in Europe, where 20 years ago there was war. The former Yugoslavia, areas in the Caucasus, or even now in the former Soviet Union, you've got the conflict in the Ukraine. And all this generates nationalistic tensions, and extremist groups are very prompt to use these differences, these tensions, in order to spread their propaganda. And they use football stadiums for that.
Indeed, indeed. Ambassador, let's bring you into the equation now, because we've got people and representatives from many sporting codes, like UEFA, for instance. But you come in on a different angle, and this is on a much higher level, and obviously not focusing in on one single sporting activity and racism. You're focusing in on everything. What's your personal standpoint?
Well, in Geneva, where I chair some committees dealing with racism, we are looking at it globally. And the frightening thing is the way in which, like an electric current, one little group starts with a racist position and it sweeps across. And the dangerous thing is that this expression of xenophobia, if it's not controlled, could then find that outside of the football fields, when the crowds go out, they may also target people of color. So I think we have to work very hard at it. There is, unfortunately, a predisposition towards racism, because in many of the societies in Europe, it comes from a background, obviously, of colonialism, of white supremacy concepts, a history of slavery, apartheid. So we have to fight it all round to try and re-educate people.
For you personally, I mean, what are some incidents that have really stood out for you, where it's really made you think that this is getting out of hand now?
Well, there are long historical things. In the 60s, I was representing South Africa's non-racial sporting bodies at the Olympic meetings, and we got South Africa excluded. In 2001, we had the conference here, World Conference Against Racism. We thought the world was ready to fight racism. We later found that very few people implemented those decisions widely. So now, unfortunately, we have to realize that it is actually a struggle. The focus the world put on South Africa was as an expression of racism here and to fight it, and they did it successfully. But now we have to look at it as a global issue, because unfortunately it's spreading, even with political leaders getting support in the recent elections in European countries. So we really need to act. It's not just a question of long-term education, but of action to mobilize people against racism. And that's why this is, I think it's the world's biggest gathering of representatives of this kind. And now the challenge will be for us to make sure that it's followed up in all the countries where we find this expression, and even in countries where we don't find this expression, to really build a worldwide movement.
What is the problem? I ask this in all sincerity. I mean, we're watching sports. We're all sport-loving individuals. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. There is a sport that speaks to you. And yet, this racism that exists in all of these sporting codes, where, in your opinion, does it come from? Why can we not get rid of it? I'm going to give you both an opportunity. Perhaps you can start. What do you think?
I think there is also another tendency, which is that society has become a lot more open, a lot more tolerant of many different ideas, and also a lot more tolerant of diversity. And for some groups, this is unacceptable. And so, for example, in football in Europe, we also, when we talk about racism, we fight all discriminations.
Yeah.
Discrimination based, for example, on sexism, sexual orientation, aversion to certain religious principles. We are involved in all these fights at a time when society is much more open, much less prejudiced. But that provokes the ire of some of the groups that have not evolved, that have refused this openness, and it creates conflict.
Yeah, it certainly does. Ambassador, anything to add to that?
Well, I think government needs to act, because we forget that after the last war we declared racism a crime against humanity. And the terrible thing would be if we are to say that after the last war, when the victims happen to be black, it's all right. And that is unfortunately the experience around the world. So we have to get across that it is a crime against humanity, and sport is the last area where we should find racism, because it should be based on merit alone.
Yeah, it should be, but unfortunately it isn't, and that's what's happening here today, is trying to adopt a charter and a way forward of how to get rid of all forms of racism and discrimination. I mean, it's not just racism, it's discrimination, it's sexism, it's homophobic, you name it, it's absolutely everything. So thank you to my guests that have been with me since this morning. William Gillard, who is from UEFA, and Ambassador Abdul Minty as well from Geneva. Thank you very much for talking to us here on the program.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to say goodbye to you now, all of our SABC2 viewers. Thank you so very, very much for watching. Remember, if you do have access to DSTV, quickly switch over to channel 404. We've got another hour of this conversation and a lot more coming your way on this Friday edition of Morning Live. But if you're leaving us, thank you for watching. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. And it's a big shup from all of us here.